In 2016, an Australian couple and their 3 adult children set out on a road trip. Back home, their passports and bank cards were left untouched, their doors unlocked, and a few remaining cars waited with keys still in the ignition. All they had was cash and each other when they abruptly left their farm on August 29th. The middle child was the only one who'd taken his phone, but after about 18 miles, his family insisted he throw it out the window. They didn't want to be tracked. Someone or something was after them. They were sure of it. But the 25-year-old son wasn't convinced. He was willing to take part in the peculiar, impromptu road trip, if only to stay together, but he noticed his parents' disordered thinking, their paranoia, their delusions. And the years prior to all this, the family had been like any other, with no history of abnormal behavior or mental illness. It was as if they'd fallen under a spell. The morning after they departed, the son left the family, opting to travel home via train. The same day, his 29-year-old and 22-year-old sisters would steal a car, driving off on their own away from their parents, whom they reported missing once they reached the town of Goulburn. While there, the girls split up. The 22-year-old, like her brother, was still in a relatively clear state of mind. She returned home, but her sister did not. Instead, the eldest girl stowed away, surreptitiously climbing inside a utility vehicle. By the time the driver discovered her, she was in a catatonic state, unable to remember her own name. Meanwhile, her parents were still driving. On August 31st, the husband stayed behind in Wangaratta while his wife took public transportation and continued north. She ended up 217 miles away. A Good Samaritan phoned police after finding her alone and agitated, aimlessly wandering through the town of Yass. As for her husband, later that night he decided to closely follow a couple's vehicle, tailgating them until they were forced to pull over. Once they did, he left his car and sprinted toward them, but came to a sudden halt in the middle of the road. He stood there, silent and stoic under the glare of their headlights, staring them down as if to communicate a wordless threat. Then he turned, slowly walked to a neighboring park, and disappeared. He was found running near an airport days later. After that, the family was reunited, and things seemingly returned to normal, with no further reports of any odd or alarming behavior. But what exactly had happened to them? Why did they do this? As these questions went unanswered, the mystified public began proposing different explanations. Could they have been poisoned by farm chemicals? Could they have owed money to a shady figure? Could they have been on drugs or in a cult? As far as police could determine, it was none of those things, but the son had this to say. It's really hard to explain or put a word on it, but they were just fearing for their lives, and then they decided to flee. It was a buildup of different, normal, everyday events, just pressure, and it slowly got worse as the days went by. I've never seen anything like it. The general consensus now is that this was a case of Folie. No, not that one. Not that one either. Yes, that Folie. A strange phenomenon of shared psychosis between 2 or more people who may exhibit erratic, irrational behavior in response to paranoid delusions. Thankfully, in this instance, no one got hurt, which is why I've refrained from using the names of the family members. But while their road trip didn't end in tragedy, the same can't be said for other instances of Folie. The condition, while rare, is dangerous enough that it has led to violence, even murder. With that in mind, let's take a look at 3 other cases from 3 distinct moments in time, starting all the way back in the 19th century. Bridget Cleary, a 26-year-old dressmaker and hatter from Tipperary, had fallen ill. Racked with bronchitis, she was bedbound, her busy schedule disrupted. She hoped she'd soon get back to work, back to her routine, back to herself. But her husband had other ideas. Bridget was chic and independent, sophisticated and intelligent. Ahead of her time, literate with a modern manner, she made a living from her clothing business and a side gig selling eggs. At 18, she married a woodworker named Michael Cleary, and now the couple resided in an upscale cottage, though their home was purportedly closer to the supernatural realm than Michael would have liked. The cottage was built on or near a medieval ring fort, believed to be the home of dastardly fairies. As Sarah Dern wrote for Atlas Obscura, according to Irish folklore, fairies are human-sized mythical beings that live in a hidden world. Like humans, they can be generous, bestowing good favor on those who treat them with respect, or they can be evil and vindictive, spoiling milk and damaging crops. Often, if something went wrong in 19th century Ireland, it was the fairies' doing. And on March 4th, 1895, something did go wrong. Bridget came down with an unrelenting cold. There were repeated attempts to fetch the town doctor, but it would take 9 days for him to finally tend to Bridget. By that point, she had deteriorated enough to warrant a visit from a priest, who performed last rites. Through it all, her husband Michael watched and worried, a creeping paranoia taking hold. This, he decided, was the fault of fairies. And it wasn't just that they'd caused his wife's ailment, they'd done something far darker, far worse. Because Michael believed Bridget had been stolen. Kidnapped by the fairies and spirited away to another realm, they'd replaced her with a changeling. The woman in his house was just a look-alike, an interloper, a fraud. Imagine waking up one day, turning to look at your partner in bed, and seeing a stranger wearing their face like a mask. You are certain they're an imposter, and every move they make or word they speak only solidifies your conviction. Everything is off in an ineffable way, like the difference between a photorealistic CGI human versus the real thing. The light in their eyes, the asymmetry of their smile, the way they walk, none of it looks right. That was the lens through which Michael Cleary now viewed Bridget. A 2013 article from the Irish Journal of Medical Science proposed that Michael might have been suffering from capgras delusion, which causes the belief that a family member or loved one, often a spouse, has been replaced. Perhaps someone could have reasoned with him, talked him down from the height of his paranoia if only they'd tried, but those around him made no attempt to extinguish his delusions. On the contrary, they fanned the flames. One such person was Jack Dunn, a relative of Bridget's who happened to be a Shanachie or folklorist with fairy expertise. After he paid a visit to Bridget's bedside, he told Michael, "That is not your wife." And with those words, Bridget's fate was sealed. Per Dunn's suggestion, Michael obtained an herbal remedy from a so-called fairy doctor. It was mixed with milk and force-fed to Bridget on March 14, 1895, the night of her exorcism. Multiple people, neighbors as well as her own family, including her father, participated in torturing Bridget to drive out the changeling. She was pelted with unspeakable things, burned with a hot poker, restrained and made to choke down the fairy doctor's cocktail as her husband threatened, "Take it, you witch, or I'll kill you." It was a night of terror and torment for the ailing woman, and throughout it all, her husband and others repeatedly asked the same question. "Are you Bridget Cleary, daughter of Patrick Boland, wife of Michael Cleary, in the name of God?" It didn't matter how many times she said yes. They wouldn't listen. The next day, family members stopped by the Cleary's cottage for tea, but things took a dark and deadly turn when Bridget asked for milk. Since changelings are supposed to crave milk, Michael decided Bridget's exorcism must not have been successful. He proceeded to douse her in paraffin oil and set her on fire. Though he committed this crime in the presence of Bridget's own family, they did nothing to stop him. "She's not my wife," he insisted, and his in-laws seemed to agree. They, too, were frightened of fairies, seduced by Michael's psychosis. It was as if, like pixie dust, his delusions had bewitched them, blinding them to the ugly reality of what they witnessed. Bridget's last words were said to be, "Just give me a chance." Michael believed the fairies would bring back the real Bridget after the changeling's death, but of course no such magic ever occurred. As days passed with no sight of her, his mental state continued to unravel, and rumors swirled about her mysterious disappearance. On March 20th, 5 days after the murder, Michael Cleary was arrested. He wasn't alone. Jack Dunn, 4 of Bridget's cousins, and her father Patrick Boland were arrested as well. All of them would be found guilty. Michael Cleary spent 15 years in prison. Upon release, he left Ireland for Montreal. Bridget, meanwhile, was buried in an unmarked grave. Robbed of her life and promising future at just 26, in death she was martyred as the quote-unquote last witch burned in Ireland. And when her highly publicized case wormed its way into pop culture, a new nursery rhyme was born. To this day, the question is still asked. Are you a witch or are you a fairy? Or are you the wife of Michael Cleary? Something was wrong. René Lancelin, a retired lawyer who lived with his wife and unmarried daughter in the city of Le Mans, returned home to find no sign of his family, just a silent, dark house. The three of them were supposed to attend a dinner party that night, but neither his wife Léonie nor his daughter Geneviève had shown. As he approached the front door, an ominous feeling snaked through him. He couldn't open it. The door was bolted shut. Strange as this was, there was one glimmer of hope. Upstairs, a light was on in the maid's room, faintly visible from the street. Perhaps he was worried for nothing. Nevertheless, he sought the police to help him unlock the door, unsure of what he'd find on the other side. They were greeted by a gruesome discovery: the murdered bodies of Léonie and Geneviève, each with their skulls cracked and crushed by a hammer, thighs split open with a knife, eyes gouged out by hand. Like a funeral procession, the police officers formed a somber line and ascended the stairs. They expected the Papin sisters, the housekeepers, to have been slain as well. But upon entering the sisters' bedroom, police found both women curled up in bed together, naked, with a bloody hammer resting on the floor. Christine Papin was 27 and Léa Papin was 21. They'd been working as live-in housekeepers for the Lancelins since 1926. Excellent employees and shy, well-mannered women, they didn't have any prior history of violence or crime. There had been no warning signs, nothing to suggest either sister was capable of such a gory, grisly act. And one night they'd been transformed, overtaken by a sudden and shared homicidal rage. Why? It could be because Madame Léonie was an abusive boss. It could be because the sisters had blown a fuse before the Lancelins returned home, and the cost to repair it would have been taken from their salary. Whatever the case, Léa and Christine had snapped, leaving a bloody trail in their wake. The sisters pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. Shared delusional disorder, otherwise known as Folie, Deux, was the diagnosis. During the trial, they were repeatedly questioned about their sexuality and whether they harbored romantic feelings for each other. Rumors of an incestuous relationship had plagued them since the night of the murders. If they'd confessed to sharing some taboo tete-a-tete, it could have convinced the jury of their insanity, but neither would admit to such a thing. They maintained their bond was strictly sisterly. Both Léa and Christine were found guilty. Nevertheless, the jury decided that Christine was more culpable due to her older age and commanding personality. She was seen as the mastermind, with Léa her impressionable accomplice. Because of that, the sisters were given different punishments. Léa received a 10-year prison sentence, while Christine was sentenced to death. Though quickly commuted to life, being spared the guillotine wasn't enough to save her. She died on May 18, 1937, 4 years after the murders. Unable to cope with the separation from her sister, Christine had starved herself to death. Léa, on the other hand, served only 8 years before being released on good behavior. She went on to lead a quiet, law-abiding life. What is it about siblings that makes them have some of the most perplexing, off-sided cases of Folie Deux? Because the Papins are far from the only example. Another infamous one would be the so-called silent twins. There's also the Beaver brothers, who committed familicide in 2015. And then, of course, there's the story of the Eriksson sisters. Ursula and Sabina Eriksson, 40-year-old identical twins from Sweden, boarded a bus in Liverpool and quickly caught the driver's attention. They stood out. Both were tall, leggy blondes. One of them wore a blood-red trench coat and big pair of sunglasses, like a sleek but discreet celebrity trying to sneak through JFK. But it was their behavior that made the driver take a second look. They clung to their bags as if holding onto life preservers, exchanging whispers and furtive glances. Both seemed panicked, murmuring in a frenzy back and forth. The bus driver watched from his rear view, his fingers tightening around the wheel. He was concerned enough that he'd eventually ask to see their bags, but they refused, opting instead to exit the bus in Staffordshire. He didn't think of them again, at least not until later that night, when he saw a report on the news.
2 women caught on CCTV, putting lives at risk by walking down the central reservation of a motorway. It sparks a police response, but this is only the start. As officers approach, the women run into the fast lane. One is hit by oncoming traffic. Remarkably, neither is seriously injured. The women are twin sisters from Sweden, but what happens next baffles officers.
Oh, no!
We've frozen the pictures here because of their shocking nature.
Mike Alpha, we need ambulance. Senior officers to the scene. We've got 2 possible fatals.
Without any warning, one of the women breaks away from the officer into the traffic and is hit by a lorry. Then her sister also runs out.
Oscar Tango 3-3 on arrival. Both females have ran out into the carriageway. It's got 2 serious casualties. We're going to need air ambulance.
One is in a critical condition, the other's unconscious after hitting this windscreen, surviving an accident which would kill most people. But as she comes round, the situation escalates.
No! No!
Overwhelmed by her strength, the policewoman calls for backup to prevent another major incident on the opposite carriageway. The Swedish woman is in fighting mode, and it takes 6 people to restrain her. The air ambulance arrives and both are finally taken to hospital. But for those left behind, the experience has been traumatic, particularly for the lorry driver who hit one of the women.
For Ursula, that's where the story ended. She spent the next 7 weeks in the hospital recovering from her injuries, then went back to her normal life. But for Sabina, this was just the beginning. Charged with trespassing on the expressway and assaulting an officer, Sabina was released after spending a night in jail. She made an offhand comment to an officer. We say in Sweden that an accident rarely comes alone. Usually at least one more follows, maybe 2. Now she found herself in Stoke-on-Trent, a city in Staffordshire, lost and alone. She started searching for the hospital that held her sister, but instead she found 2 men leaving a pub. Glenn Hollingshead, a 54-year-old welder and former Royal Air Force paramedic, was walking his dog with his friend Peter. When they came upon Sabina, she asked for directions. Though she was friendly and nice, both men could tell she was on edge. She seemed nervous, jumpy, vulnerable. Peter suspected she was on the run from an abusive boyfriend. When she said she hadn't eaten, Glenn invited her to his house for food. The 3 of them chatted over ham sandwiches, Sabina periodically glancing out the window. At one point, she offered the men cigarettes, but took them back because they might be poisoned. In spite of her strange behavior, Glenn wanted to help. It was in his nature. He'd help anyone, even strangers. Because of his generosity, Peter wasn't surprised when Glenn offered to let Sabina stay with him. But he might have been surprised when she accepted. The next day, Glenn's neighbor Frank Booth, a 66-year-old retired bus driver, was washing his car when Glenn came staggering out of his house. As he stumbled onto his neighbor's driveway, he told Frank, "I'm dying. She stabbed me." At first, Frank thought he was joking, but then he saw the blood. Glenn's chest had a visible hole, his shirt soaked red. Somehow he was still able to speak, even asking Frank for permission before resting against the bumper of his car. Frank called an ambulance, but it was too late. Glenn had been stabbed in the heart, a blow that would have proved fatal regardless of how quickly paramedics arrived. Laying on the ground with his neighbor beside him, on May 20th, 2008, Glenn Hollingshead died of his injuries. And, under cover of chaos, Sabina escaped. She was next seen running down the road, clutching a hammer. She kept taking the hammer to her own skull, hitting herself over and over. It was disturbing enough to attract the concern of a passing driver who left his car to wrangle the hammer from Sabina's hands. A struggle ensued. Sabina used a roof tile to smack the back of his head. They'd found her. Seeing the flashing lights and hearing the wail of sirens, Sabina took off yet again. She was chased onto a bridge overlooking a highway. Backed into a corner, Sabina had nowhere to go but refused to surrender. Instead, she jumped. Sabina fell 40 feet, colliding with the pavement of the A50 expressway. She survived, though she broke both of her ankles and fractured her skull. The following year, she pled guilty to manslaughter with diminished responsibility for the death of Glenn Hollingshead. While she didn't deny her crimes, she declined to offer any explanation. Still, the prosecution and defense agreed that she was not in her right mind during the stabbing, and in exchange for her plea, Sabina was sentenced to just 5 years in prison. The judge said, "I understand that this sentence will seem entirely inadequate to the relatives of the deceased. However, I have sentenced on the basis that the reason for the killing was the mental illness, and therefore the culpability of the defendant is low." Sabina Eriksson was released from prison in 2011 after serving 2.5 years. Would you rather wake up to a world that's gone crazy, where everyone is out to get you and nothing is real, but only your sister or brother or parents see the truth and recognize the danger? Or would you rather wake up to your spouse, your family, your loved ones having gone crazy, now seeing the rest of the world, including you, as their enemy? There are two ways to be a victim of Folie à Deux. The first is to suffer from it, the second is to suffer in proximity of it. Either way, you'll find yourself trapped in a topsy-turvy nightmare world, where day is night and up is down, where insanity reigns and an implicit threat of violence lurks around every corner. It's terrifying to lose touch with reality, to lose your mind, to lose yourself. But we might all be more susceptible to madness than we realize, on the verge of going postal after just one bad day. And what if, out of nowhere, you start seeing sense in other people's delusions? What if paranoia spread like a virus? What if your sanity slowly and subtly slipped away? You tell yourself that could never happen, but what if you're wrong? The scariest creatures aren't ghosts or ghouls, nor the changelings that haunted Michael Cleary. People are what's most frightening, and the unpredictability of the human mind. Sometimes it's the stranger your mother warned you about, but sometimes it's your own friend or relatives you should be wary of. And sometimes the person you need to fear the most is you. But if you can't trust friends, family, yourself, or your sanity, what can you trust?